Okay, everybody. Hello, everybody. It's Natalina. Welcome to my kitchen. We're really excited to be starting our preserving program for summer of 2020. So let's get started. Today it's about asparagus. I picked up some beautiful asparagus. Here, I've already got it trimmed and ready. But first, what I want to do is just quickly go through what you're going to need to do this. And this is more or less for our new canners that are watching today. I know some of you are seasoned pros, but there are some new people. So I've got my large canning pot with water, almost full, but up to here, and it's coming up to a boil so that I can sanitize my jars, okay? Then next to it, I've got another pot here with a 1-to-1 ratio of my vinegar to water, okay? I have 12 cups total in here. I have 6 cups of distilled white vinegar, and I have 6 cups of water. Now we'll talk about the water just briefly. We're on a well here, so my water does not have any chlorine in it, okay? So I'm using tap water, 6 cups. Okay, so a couple things. If your water has chlorine in it, you can either use filtered water if you have a reverse osmosis system, or you can fill up a really large jug of water, leave it sit on the counter for about 24 hours, and the chlorine will evaporate. Okay, so that's another way to get rid of it. There's no need to buy water or anything like that at all. In terms of soft water, if it's soft, that's fine. If it's hard, that's fine too. Okay, no preference there. So I've got that mixed, and I've just got it coming up to a boil. It's almost come up to a boil. When it starts to bubble, I'm going to turn it off and it'll be ready. Okay. In my last pot here, I have my snap lids. These are my brand new Bernardin snap lids because I'm using a 2-part lid here. I've got the ring here, okay, and then the lids are in here. I've just covered them in water and just heated them till they started to boil. Then I turned it off, and I'm just keeping them warm in there, okay? Then I have 4 jars here. So your recipe is for 1 liter jar. It can be a regular jar or a wide mouth. If you have both, which I do, I prefer the wide mouth for asparagus. Just simply when it sits in there, and when we stuff these, you're going to see I'm going to put them in upside down. They don't have to bend around the little shoulder of a regular jar, like this one. Here, let me show you real quick. So you could in fact use this, but you might want to cut them a little bit shorter so they sit below this little shoulder. And the reason is once they get stuffed in here, they're going to start to bend, and then they might actually break down at the bottom. Okay, you can still use them, of course. But because I have both, I'm choosing to do 4 wide mouth jars. Now in my canning pot that's here, I haven't put my rack in yet because I'll do that when I go to process the jars. But when I put my rack in there, I can only fit 4 wide mouth jars, or I can fit 5 of the regular standard jars, okay? Because it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 in the middle. So that is something you also need to consider. You want to make sure that whatever you're putting together will actually fit in your pot. I have a couple of different pots, so this particular one I'm doing today only fits 4 of the wide mouth, but that's what I've decided that I'm going to do. Okay, so we've got our 4 jars. They all should be 1 liter, whether they're regular standard size lids or the wide mouth. Okay, I've got 4. I've got all my spices here. I've got my mustard seed, my dill weed, oregano, peppercorns, chilies, and I've got some garlic already peeled and whole cloves in there. Then I've got all my tools. I've got my measuring tools, measuring spoons, my rack, and then I've got all my canning tools. Okay, I've got my funnel. Tongs with the silicone grips are really good, and you're going to see why very shortly when we go to sanitize our jars. Okay, of course our funnel, some sort of tool to get rid of the air bubbles, whether it's this one or just another plastic item like a end of a spatula or a plastic chopstick even works great. We're going to need a ladle, okay? If you have the jar grabber, that's awesome. If not, you could also use silicone gloves or like oven mitts, okay? If you have the little magnetic holder for your lids, that comes in very handy. Not necessary, but it is very handy. These other tools, I'm not going to really use these today. I prefer my silicone tongs to these. These can work in a pinch if you don't have that type, but I do prefer that type. And then this, you know, I never use this, to be honest with you. I think it's to help take the lids off or something, and I just don't use it. It came with my kit. Okay, and then of course we've got our fresh Ontario asparagus. I purchased 4 pounds of fresh asparagus this morning, and from that I should be able to get approximately 4 jars. Now I can't tell you exactly, there's always a little bit of room with fresh produce because of the size. These are actually all pretty uniform in size, but sometimes you'll get fat ones, skinny ones, and depending on the type of jars you have, so you never know, it's never guaranteed exactly how much you're going to fit in there, but you're roughly with asparagus around 1 pound per jar. On your recipe, I think it says 10 to 20 spears, but that's because it depends on how thick they are, okay? Now, what I did ahead was I cut these down to fit. So what I did is I took one and I placed it in. We need a 1/4 inch headspace, okay? So if you want to use your tool, or you can just eyeball it, that's a 1/4 inch right there, which is the very first notch on that. On these wide mouth jars, it actually is the very first little lip on the jar. So if this is the top, the very first lip, that's about a 1/4 inch. So you can see where my asparagus is sitting, it's just below that. Okay, so you want to trim these all to fit in your jars, and you want to do that ahead. So what I did is I trimmed a couple, then I lined up the other ones on the cutting board with a sharp knife, and I cut off the excess. Now, this is not waste, of course. These are all the excess pieces on the bottom. I'm going to chop these up fine. I'll remove any fibrous or stringy bits on the very bottom that are not edible. And then the other tender pieces, I'm going to throw those into a risotto tonight. I'll make those up, or you can even just boil them up or roast them even as a side vegetable, but never any waste in this kitchen. So those will be delicious. Okay. Our vinegar and water's come up to a boil, so that's in a slower pot here. Okay, so it's come up to boil. I'm going to turn that off, and it's going to stay warm. Our pot with the large canning pot has now come up to boil. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch these around, just so I'm working right in front and you can see it. And my glasses might fall. Okay. So this has come to a boil, and you're going to want to be very careful, obviously, anytime you're working with hot pots or boiling water, especially in large quantities like this. So I'm going to take off my lid, and you can see I've got my silicone glove on now. Now, I like to use these tongs to immerse my jars, okay? Because remember, we need a perfectly clean environment when we're canning, so we need to sterilize these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in bottom first, and I'm going to immerse them, and it's going to just fill up with that boiling water. And then after about a minute, the weight from the water will bring it down. Okay, so now we're going to do that with all 4 of these. Okay. Now once all 4 of them are in here, we're going to let them boil for 3 or 4 minutes. And just like any cooking, it's really nice to have everything right here that you need. And then you're not running around to get it, no hurry, no chance of like burning yourself or anything like that, okay? Now, of course, these jars, I've had them for a long time. So before I washed them, so I took them out of my fruit cellar and I threw away the old snap lids, because I keep the snap lid on, just keep dust out of them. Let me put my timer on before I forget. Okay, so getting back to those jars. So I threw out the old snap lids, I kept the rings, I washed the jars with soap and water, I put them upside down to strain, and then I put them on this tea towel here to kind of dry. They don't need to be dry though, of course. Okay, so now we're sanitizing them for a few minutes, okay? When the timer goes off, then we're going to remove them to here, being very careful not to burn ourselves. So we could also use the tongs again to get those out, or if you have one of these jar lifters, you could use that as well. Okay, so it's at a rapid boil, it's on high, just boiling away there. And like I said, the water's up to here, so they're pretty much fully immersed in that water, okay? And I do not have the rack in there. You can see the rack is here. I'll put this in. So after we remove this, we're going to use this same water to actually can these jars, so I'll be able to put the rack just right into the same pot, okay? we're down to the last minute. So these are going to be done very, very quickly. So if you have everything ready, this can move very quickly. I often do small batches of canning, and I usually, for some reason, it's kind of an end of day thing because I work during the day, we have dinner, and then I might do a small batch of canning after dinner, and then just let them sit out all night to cool. It happens to be afternoon today. I did a batch of these the other night in the evening, but you know, you can do as little or as many of these as you want. Obviously the recipe is just for one jar. You can do one jar, but of course make it worth your while. This is a really delicious recipe. It looks like the timer's going to go in a second. It's great. Pickled asparagus or anything pickled is great to add to an antipasto platter. I also love to add it to healthy bowls, which is, you know, just a layered salad. I like to throw in a little bit of quinoa and salad and fresh vegetables, pickled vegetables, and some sort of protein. And I find if I have pickled vegetables, then I use less dressing, so it's a little healthier. We got less fat. So, okay, so it looks like we're down, count the last final seconds, and then my beeper's gonna go, so let me turn that off before it goes. Okay, so we're gonna turn off our water. Okay, so if you're using the tongs, you're gonna wanna be very careful because they're now full of water, these jars, okay? So I'm just doing that, okay? Or, like I said, you could use the jar lifters, but just be very careful. That's why I like these silicone ones. They grab, they have a really good grip on them. Okay? So we have to maintain a really clean environment, of course, even more so really than when you're doing regular cooking. So of course you're still washing your hands and all that, but we're also sanitizing everything. Okay, so there's our 4 jars are ready to go. I'm going to move the pot over just so I don't touch it. I'm going to put my lids there. Okay, so, excuse me. So we've got our jars ready, and now we're going to add all of our flavoring. Now, these are the recommended flavors. You know, a little bit of spice, a little bit of garlic, and some other flavorings. If there's something that you don't like, you can certainly omit it. If there's something you'd rather put in, please experiment. Or maybe at a minimum, maybe try this combination. And then next year, if you make it, if there's something that you don't like, you could omit it and maybe just make a note this year. Okay, so first I've got my peeled garlic cloves. These are little tiny ones that came right out of the garden, so they're fresh garlic. So even though they're small, they're going to be really potent. So in those go. Okay, so garlic. Next is a ½ teaspoon of crushed chilies. So with the chilies, of course, if you don't like heat, you could always omit that. If you like a lot of heat, you could always add more. Okay, so that's a half. So these just go right into the jar. Really simple here. And you can see I've got these really large kind of Costco size containers that come in handy for canning because of course you need a lot of ingredients. Okay, this is sea salt now, ¼ teaspoon. So this is all in your recipe. You should have it all ready to go. This is just finely ground sea salt. Doesn't have to be pickling salt. It's just regular table salt or sea salt if you use it. Okay, next is 1 teaspoon of dried oregano. And that goes in. Smells so good already. I'm just adding these spices to the hot jars. Makes the aroma kind of come out. It smells amazing. So, okay, next is our mustard seeds. So these are just regular. You can get the dark ones as well, but these ones are fine. So that's 1 teaspoon. 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then the last thing is a ½ teaspoon of peppercorns. And I've got black peppercorns here. Actually, that's not the last thing. We didn't put our dill in yet, did we? Oh, 1 teaspoon of dill. I skipped over it, but I realized there was no green in there. So okay, so here's our 1 teaspoon of dried dill. You could use fresh, but you would need a lot more because this is dry. There we go. Okay, so we've got our spices in there. Now we're going to put in our beautiful asparagus. Now you're going to try and divide these up. And like I said earlier, I like to put them upside down, and I'll tell you why. When we stuff these in our jars, it's better to handle them on the cut side than on the tip side. Okay, so I'm going to go sideways just to stuff a few more in. And I'm going to put them in loose at first, and then if I have more left, I'll try more in. I find if they're upside down, I can press on those ends without ruining the tips of the asparagus. And then also too, when these are all pickled and you're going to go take them out, they're going to be much softer because right now they're raw, which we're going to talk about as well. Right now they're raw, so they'll get cooked when we preserve them and put them in the canner. So when you go to use these, they're going to be a lot softer. And I like to pull them out by this end, and that's just so the tip side doesn't get pulled off when you pull them out. But let's face it, the tip side is nicer looking and it stays more intact if we press them in. Now, if you put the jar on its side, you'll be able to stuff a few more in, and you kind of look for spots to tuck them in. Okay, so that's good for now. Ooh, that's hot. More. And actually I can see that first jar. I've got one. So I'm going to watch. I'm going to try not to touch the inside of the jar. Although I did wash my hands. I'm going to get a few more in this one jar. Okay, so it's not an exact science to how many exactly you're going to fit in here because it depends. Excuse me, my allergies. I find this heat just makes them worse. Okay, so if you tip it again, you'll see that there's a little room to just poke those in there. Actually, it might be the vinegar too that makes me cough, although it smells really nice. So, okay, so it looks like we've got a little bit more room in this one. So you can see, like when you put it on the side, all of a sudden it opens up a lot of room to tuck these in. Okay, so that one's looking pretty good. Let's see this one, I think I can fit. Yeah, this one here, you see how it's got a little more room now? I'm feeling like I should be able to get all 4 pounds of these into these 4 jars. It's looking like we should. So there's that one. This one here looks like maybe 1 or 2 more. These are actually very uniform, these asparagus. The ones I got the other day from the farm. So these I got at a market, like a farmer's market. They are Ontario. I got these at Mosborough Market, and I find they're almost all identical in size, and that's probably why, because they're from market. The ones I got a couple of days ago, I got in Bloomingdale, and I got them right at the farmer's field, and they were, some were really skinny, some were really fat, so not as perfect. But I will tell you, if you go to the farmer's market to get them, they were already trimmed. All the, you know, the fibrous bits on the end, those were already trimmed, and they were $4.25 a pound. These ones at the market were not trimmed, and they were $4.99 a pound. So if you're gonna do, if you want to do a lot of these, you're better off to go to right directly to the farmer, and you get a way better price, because of course I paid by weight today for even the trimmings that I'm not gonna use. Actually, this one looks a little bit tight. I might try it. Slip it in here. Yeah, there we go. So these are all a little closer. Now, if you have one, if you did, when you trim these, if you made them too tall, the easiest thing now is to grab some scissors, and if there's one that's poking out a little too high, you can just pop it out, just trim it with the scissors rather than taking it out and cutting it. My scissors are, here. So for this one example, and then So there's a couple here that are just a little bit too tall. I love scissors in the kitchen. Kitchen shears are great, but these are just regular scissors. So you just want to trim them down until they're inside. This one seems to be higher. I wonder if it's because that's a different jar. It might be. It's actually, yeah, it is. It's a little bit lower, that jar, now that I can see. It's lower than these other three. So that's why it was poking out a little bit more. I was wondering, because I trimmed them all about the same size. Okay, and then this one. So yeah, you might have to go in and adjust them a little bit just to make sure. Okay, so there, that is done. Now what we're gonna do is, let's move this pot a little bit closer. So this is my vinegar and water. So I was guesstimating at 12 cups, just based on, you know, what I've done in the past. So 12 cups should be enough. If by chance it's a little bit short, we'll just mix them up really quick. So we need our ladle and our funnel, and then we're just gonna cover these up now with the vinegar and water. Now, as soon as this hot liquid hits the raw asparagus, it's going to start to cook them. And actually, I want to come back to that. So some recipes will blanch the asparagus first. I prefer not to, and that's why I love to do them this way. And the reason is they're going to start to cook now as soon as they hit this liquid. Then when we process these in the water bath for 15 minutes, they're going to continue to cook. Okay, so if you blanch them first and then they further cook, I just find they get too soft. I like them to be, it's just like vegetables. I don't like overcooked vegetables. I prefer them a little firmer. So that's why I like to do it like this. Because you know what? If you were boiling asparagus just as a side vegetable, you wouldn't cook them 15 minutes, let alone 15 plus a hot liquid. And then as the jars are cooling down, they can continue to cook with the residual heat. So yeah, they're getting cooked in the hot liquid. And actually, it looks like I am going to be a little short. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave that one a little short because I have some vinegar and water that I mixed up in case I needed more. But it's not hot, so then I will have to bring it up. So that way, this one that's boiling, I'm going to add to these jars. And then the one that's going to be not quite as hot, I'm going to warm it up. I'll just top them all up. Because this just needs to be warm, and it's very, very hot right now. So this is our first project. I'm really excited to fill up my cantina with all those beautiful preserves. So this here is just a mix of 1-to-1 vinegar and water, same as what we had, it's just cold. So I'm just going to heat that real quick and then we'll top these up. This one's ready to put the jar on it, so I'm just going to show you that. So press those down a bit. They're all in there. Okay, so now these are our snap lids that I brought up to a boil earlier that I showed you. I'm going to hold the magnet against them and just drain out the water now. Okay, so they've stayed nice and warm while they're in there, and the reason we heat them up in the water is they're stuck together, is so that rubber gets kind of hot, and so now it'll seal. So there it is. So that's why this magnet's super handy, as you can see. So now that way I know I'm not going to touch the inside of the jar. It's on there, and I'm just going to tighten this, they call this finger tight. So it's not super tight, it's just tight with my fingers, okay? So that one is ready to go. Let me just do that real quick. This is heating up quick because it's on induction here, so this will not take long at all. You can always see the smoke coming off of it actually, and because this other stuff in here is really hot, So we'll just get our other lids ready. Okay, so we're getting some bubbles there already. I'm going to turn that off. And then I'm just going to top these up. So these 4 jars, I ended up with about 13 cups of liquid because I can see what's missing from that mason jar. It was full. So it's about 3 and a bit of liquid per one of these 1 liter wide mouth jars. So like you can never really get it down to an exact size. That's why if you're doing a lot of pickling, I always seem to have vinegar and water kicking around like extra. So that extra that I had in the mason jar, I'll just keep that for another one of our projects that we're going to do because we know we'll need it. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of those. And now I'm going to add our lids. Whoops. Okay, so there we go. Oh, and actually, shoot, I forgot something. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back here. Sorry guys, I'm going to remove those. Okay, so one thing I forgot to do was to check for bubbles. Usually jams and relishes, because they're thicker liquids, those might have some bubbles in them. With the vinegar and water, it's so thin, you would see if there are any bubbles. So that's what you want to do. You want to remove any air bubbles. And usually when you're doing pickles, any sort of pickled vegetable like this, there's not as many as like one of the thicker ones. You would see them if there was any bubbles. And then you would just use this tool or whatever tool you're using just to kind of release the air bubbles. Okay, so we're doing that. And then a very important tip is to wipe the rim, okay? Like I said, it's important, especially with jams and relishes, because it's really sticky and thick, okay? And if there was anything on these jars, it might prevent them from sealing. So you just want to use just a clean cloth or a paper towel even, just to wipe those down, okay? Yeah, I'd forgotten to close that one up. Okay, so now we're going to put our lids on. There we go. So 1, 2, these 2 are stuck together. Okay. Why is this magnet letting me down today? It's like it's suctioning to the bottom. Oh, there we go. Okay, get rid of that. And now we've got our rings that have been washed with soap and water. Fingertip tight. Fingertip tight again. Okay. There's number 3. And then our last one. Okay, so these are really hot now, so you're going to want to be careful. We're going to return that to a boil once we add our jars. So that's where I now like to use this. But we are going to put the rack in there now, okay? This rack has got 2 sides, okay? This is for 500 ml jars. It fits more here. This is the side that I want. It's just got these little brackets and it only fits 4 of those wide mouth. I'm gonna use the tongs to put it in the water because the water's hot. Okay, now let's slide this over. Okay, so now what you want to do is you want to carefully lift your jars with your jar lifter or your silicone gloves if you don't have one of these, and just carefully put it in the section for the jar. Okay, now the water is going to rise when I add these in. So then what I'll do is once it gets high, I'll scoop out some of the water if I have to with a ladle into a pot or something to discard it. Now you do want the water to cover these jars by about 1 inch. Okay, so right now it's covering them by about 1/2 inch. So by the time this one goes in, I might have to take away some of the water. Looks like, yeah, it's very close, but we will take some away because what will happen is when it boils, it will overboil. Okay, so now I'll get my ladle and just a pot, and I'll remove some until I have about 1 inch of water above the jar. So the jars need to be fully immersed, okay? So because it depends on the type of pot you're using, some canning pots are like lower and wider. Okay, this one's a little bit taller. So they're all going to be configured a little bit differently. So you just need to know that they need to be covered. Okay, so now this water is already boiled, so it won't take long for it to come back up to a boil. The jars are hot. Everything's hot in there except for the asparagus, because the asparagus was cold, so that's going to bring down the temperature a little bit. So it will take a little bit of time for it to come up, but a little quicker than if we just added cold water to this and waited for it to come up. Okay, so you want a full rolling boil, and that is when it's starting to be processed. Okay, so in order for the jars to seal, it has to be at a full boil for the recommended time. Okay, so for this particular recipe, it tells you right on your recipe, it's 15 minutes that it needs to be processed. So you start timing this from the full rolling boil. Okay, once it starts boiling hard, there's water going to be sputtering out. It's wise to take away the lid. Excuse me, and then start the timer. Okay, so 15 minutes. Once it boils for 15 minutes after your timer goes off, turn it off. Let the mason jar sit in here until it's safe, till all the water settled down, no longer boiling hard. And then you can remove the lid, and using your jar lifter, you want to remove the mason jars, all 4 of them, and place them on cloth on the counter here, and they need to cool off for a full 24 hours. Okay, during that time, when they cool off is when they'll actually seal. Okay, so let me just give you a little demonstration actually, because this is some pickling spice. So actually I have it here. So okay, so this is a jar that's not sealed, and hopefully you can hear that noise. Okay, that's because the lid is still concave. Okay, so it's going like this. All right. When it seals, it's going to go the opposite. Okay, so it's right now like this. It's going to go the opposite. This is going to kind of suction in, and it's going to be sealed. So that rubber seal on the ring is that, you know, we were trying to get it to melt a little bit. It's going to further melt, and it's going to seal on there. Okay, so you're going to sit all 4 jars here to cool for at least 24 hours. So for me, you know, I'll come back the next day, and if there's any of the jars are still making that sound, I know that they did not seal. Okay, so then you have a choice to make. You could either reprocess them again, and it would have to be a minimum of 15 minutes again. So in this case with asparagus, that would mean cooking them even more, so they're going to be even softer. So with this particular recipe, that would not be my choice. Okay, what I would do is I would just put the jar in the fridge if I knew it didn't seal, and I would just use it up within a week or so. Okay, the only reason is just because I don't want them to cook more. If I had a lot of jars, say you had a bad batch of lids, if a lot of jars didn't seal, then I probably would reseal them, just because it would be too much to use up in a week. But that is a little test, and if you were to be in the same room while they're cooling down, you'll actually hear them kind of make a ping, you know, ping sound, kind of just like that, when they actually finish sealing. So for the seasoned canners out there, you know that's music to our ears, hearing all the jars ping. I know when I do big batches of, say, tomatoes, because we do, you know, larger batches with that, you'll hear them kind of, it's almost like a little chorus, you know, ping, 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 the music of them all cooling down. So it's a very nice, nice sound to hear. Music to our ears, knowing that all our work is now sealed tight, so we can enjoy these wonderful preserves later in the year. So that is the end of our first little demonstration. I'm not going to wait for you to wait for this to boil because it's got to come up to a boil and then go for 15 minutes, so it'll be a little while. But what I will do is I'll post a little video of the jars the next day and checking them and kind of what to expect the next day. With asparagus, because they're bright green when they're raw, after they're canned with the vinegar and everything, they're going to be not quite as bright, almost more like a yellow green. So that is quite normal for them to change in colors. A lot like pickles. Pickles are, you know, the color changes a little bit from fresh cucumbers to pickles. So same kind of idea. But the most important thing is to make sure that they're sealed. Okay. Now I will be available Saturday morning now. Saturday morning from 10 to 11, we're going to do a live Q&A. So I'm going to be live streaming on the Facebook group page. So a lot of you will have made your preserves already. Some of you might be in the process of making them, or some of you may not have started, just depending on your schedule. So please, any questions that come up while you're making your recipe, if you happen to do it before, please write them down. And then when we have the live Q&A, we'll ask the questions. The questions will go in the comments on Facebook, and then I'll be answering them live, and then those will be recorded on the group page for you to go back to anytime. So if you decide next week that you want to do some more asparagus, it'll still be up there. It'll always be up there, actually. This group page, you know, it's still kind of new for me, but I think my hope is that those of you that joined, you'll be like a lifetime member. And my hope is that if we get enough people to join next year, those that joined the previous year, you'll still be on there. And so any new recipes that are added next year, you're welcome to enjoy those or go back to these original recipes. Any new members then would pay a fee to get the new recipes, plus get access to these existing recipes that are going to be on here. So basically we'll build kind of like a catalog really of wonderful recipes, and they may not all be recipes that we actually, or that I actually demonstrate, because if someone comes along, a great recipe, it'd be wonderful if you could share it. And then there'll be just, you know, it'll be a really good resource for everything to do with preserving. Okay, so I hope this has inspired you to pickle some asparagus, because it is wonderful this time of year. Actually, it's very, very good this year. I've had a lot of local asparagus this year, just as a side vegetable in risotto and now canning. It's one of my favorite spring vegetables. So please make sure you write down your questions, and we will talk to you soon. Good luck with your first project. Ciao for now.